The tablet was found in pieces. That was not unusual. Most ancient tablets are. What made this one different was a single phrase buried in the middle of the third column, a phrase that the first translators read, cataloged, and moved past without stopping. It described the blood of a specific being, not gods in general, not the Anunnaki, not the pantheon, but one particular figure, selected by name, killed by design, and used in a way the official translation has always described as ritual, symbolic, mythological, a poetic metaphor for the divine origin of human consciousness. That explanation held for decades. Then someone read the same phrase again and noticed that it did not describe a metaphor. It described a procedure, a specific donor, a specific property transferred, and a result that was supposed to persist, not in the first human only, but in every human that came after, carried forward through generations in something the Sumerians named with a precision that does not survive translation cleanly. The Atrahasis tablet is roughly 3,700 years old. It describes the creation of humanity in detail that mainstream scholars have always treated as religious poetry. But if one contested reading is even partly accurate, then this tablet is not a creation myth. It is a biological record, and in May of 2026, an intelligence agency may have spent 30 million DNA profiles trying to find its evidence. The tablet itself is Akkadian cuneiform, written on clay in a script that takes years to read fluently and longer to interpret with confidence. The most complete surviving version dates to approximately 1650 BCE, written during the reign of King Ammi-Saduqa of Babylonia. Scholars agree it draws on older Sumerian source material, which means the story it tells is older than the copy that survived. How much older is a question no one can answer with certainty. The physical object is fragmentary. The left edge of the primary tablet is cracked. There are gaps, places where the clay broke, where lines of text simply end and do not resume. The Assyrian dialect variant recovered from the library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh fills in some sections but complicates others. The same passage sometimes reads differently depending on which copy you consult. Translators have worked with this ambiguity for over a century, and the scholarly consensus has always arrived at the same general interpretation. This is a Mesopotamian creation myth, parallel in many ways to Genesis, and its language is symbolic. The official reading goes like this. The lower gods, the Igigi, were tasked with hard labor, digging rivers, working the land, mining for the higher gods, the Anunnaki. After 40 years of this, they rebelled. Enlil, the lord of the sky, wanted punishment. Enki, the god of wisdom, proposed a solution. They would create a substitute worker. They would make something new, something that could carry the burden instead. That something was humanity. A minor deity was chosen. His name in one tradition is Wela, in another, Au-Ilu. He was killed. His flesh and blood were mixed with clay by the womb goddess Nintu, and from that mixture the first human was formed. To mainstream scholars, that is the story. Divine clay, symbolic blood, a mythological origin that explains why humans must work, why they grow old, why they die. The blood of the slain god gives humanity its consciousness and its spirit, called etemu in Akkadian, and binds the gods to a kind of responsibility for the species they made. It is, in the official interpretation, poetry about purpose, nothing more. But there is one detail that does not stay comfortably inside that reading. The text does not describe a generic sacrifice. It names a specific being, and it does not say the blood was added for symbolic weight. It says the blood carries something particular, the itemu, yes, but also the temu, which in Akkadian refers to reason, to consciousness, to a specific kind of cognitive function. These are not the same word. They are not used interchangeably in other Akkadian texts. The distinction matters. Mainstream scholars acknowledge the distinction, but read it as literary parallelism, a kind of deliberate doubling common in ancient Near Eastern poetry. The same idea said twice in slightly different terms for rhythmic and theological effect. The problem is the word attached to the blood itself. The Akkadian determinative, a classifier that appears before a word to indicate its category attached to the slain deity Waila, is the symbol Dingir. In standard translation, Dingir means God, but Dingir is genuinely ambiguous. Scholars have noted for decades that it can also mean divine being, sacred rank, or something closer in practice to a high-ranking priest. Margaret Whitney Green noted this ambiguity in her 1975 dissertation on Sumerian literature. It has never been cleanly resolved, so the question is simple and uncomfortable. If Dingir does not mean a deity in the cosmological sense, if it means something more like a being of a particular biological or spiritual category, then what exactly was Waila? And what exactly was extracted from him? The official explanation is comfortable. The artifact, read carefully, is not. In 2014, a team working through the holdings of the Sipper Library published a new batch of Atrahasis material in a Cambridge academic journal called Iraq. The Sippar tablets added fragments not well represented in the Lambert-Millard translation, the standard scholarly edition that had defined the text since 1969. Most of the new material aligned with the known version, but in one section, working through a comparative analysis of the blood-mixing passage, a cuneiformist noted something in the margin of a fragment. A qualifier attached to the description of Waila's blood does not appear in the most cited English translations. The word's Akkadian root connects to concepts of marking, of setting apart, of distinguishing one thing from a category of otherwise similar things. In the mainstream reading, it is poetic intensification. The blood is divine, therefore marked, therefore special. Standard mythological language. But the context is strange. The same root in a different tablet entirely appears in a section dealing not with gods or rituals, but with classification, with sorting, with the identification of a thing by its properties. On its own, this would be a footnote, a minor translation dispute handled in a specialist journal with a readership of several hundred people worldwide. The issue is that the full comparative analysis, the part that places the qualifier in context against other Akkadian usage, has not appeared in any publicly accessible popular translation. The German language edition by Wolfram von Soden, published in 1994 in a volume called Tuat 34, contains the most detailed philological treatment of this passage. It has not been translated into English. It has not been digitized for open access. No one had to suppress it. Academic material from 1994 simply aged into inaccessibility, which is not a conspiracy. It is how knowledge accumulates in layers, with the most specific detail buried deepest. Here is what is verified by scholarly sources. According to Abraham Winitzer of the University of Notre Dame, writing for Bible Odyssey, the divine Temu that inheres in humanity through the Atrahasis creation event is linguistically bound to both the word for divine blood, damu, and the word for plan or intent, temu. The connection in Akkadian is not accidental. Ancient Mesopotamians treated such wordplay as cosmological proof, evidence that the natural and supernatural worlds were structured with intentional precision. The mainstream explanation is poetic. The coincidence of sounds carrying theological meaning, a literary device common in the ancient Near East, where language was considered a reflection of cosmic order, and where a word that sounded like another word was understood to reveal something true about both. That is a real and accepted principle of Akkadian textual analysis. No one disputes it. The alternative reading asks a different question. What if the wordplay is not decoration? What if it describes a system? The blood, damu, carries the plan, temu, and from that the spirit, etemu, is produced. 3 related words, 3 related concepts. Not a coincidence of sound used for poetic effect, but a deliberate technical description of a transfer. Something moved from a blood source into a recipient, carrying with it both an identity and an instruction. A marker introduced through blood, a plan embedded in the transfer, and a property, etemu, the divine spirit, that would cause human consciousness to, in the words preserved in the text, recall the plan of the gods. If that language is literal rather than liturgical, then the Atrahasis creation account is not describing how humanity was made in a general sense. It is describing what was installed, a specific property, a biological signature, something embedded at origin, carried forward through reproduction and present, in theory, in any human descended from the original line, which is, according to the text, all of us. This is speculation. The official reading may be entirely correct, but the official reading does not explain why the qualifier was there. It does not explain the specificity of the donor, and it does not explain what happened to the beings who carried the undiluted version. In Sumerian texts, the pre-flood sages are called the Apkallu. There were 7 of them. They appear before the flood as teachers, as keepers of knowledge, as beings who instructed early humanity in writing, agriculture, architecture, and the arts. They are described in the historical record as not fully human, fish-man hybrid figures, real apotropaic figurines found at actual excavation sites, were used in Mesopotamian ritual contexts to represent them. The first Apkallu, a figure named Wana or Oannes, is described by the Babylonian historian Berossus as a fishman who emerged from the sea and taught humans the creation myth itself. After the flood, the Apkallu disappear from the texts. Their post-flood equivalents are called the Umanu, classified as human. The reclassification is never explained in terms that scholars find satisfying. They were sages before. After the flood, they were still sages, but the category changed. To mainstream scholars, this reflects the Mesopotamian worldview about the flood as a civilizational boundary, before it a mythological age of divine proximity, and after it the human world as it exists now. Standard mythological structure. But if the Atrahasis creation account describes a deliberate blood transfer, a marker introduced at origin, and if the Apkallu were the beings who carried the undiluted version of that marker, then the flood is not just a catastrophe. It is a boundary between 2 populations. On one side, beings who carry the original signature in full, on the other, humanity as it has existed since. The Sumerian king list makes this transition visible in the only way available to it. Rulers before the flood reign for tens of thousands of years. After the flood, lifespans collapse to human scale. In 1 generation, something changes. The mainstream explanation is mythological numbers, not biological records. Literary hyperbole used to convey the sacred nature of the antediluvian period. Numbers so large they signal transcendence rather than duration. That may be correct. But the Eridu Genesis, a separate Sumerian text, treats the same boundary not as mythology, but as administrative reality. Before the flood, one kind of ruler. After the flood, another kind. The categories are different. The document treats this as a fact of record, not a poetic flourish, and it does not explain the reclassification. It simply notes it, the way a record notes a change in leadership or territorial boundary, because from the perspective of the scribe, the change was real, and the reason for it was already understood by anyone who had read the older texts. The second major creation account, the Babylonian Enuma Elish, introduces a different god as the blood source. Here it is Kingu, a deity who rebelled, who was captured, who was killed specifically to provide the material from which humanity was made. The god changes. The civilization changes. Sumer becomes Babylonia, but the procedure does not change. Select a specific being, kill deliberately, extract blood, bind into humanity. Mainstream scholars describe this as literary borrowing, a shared Mesopotamian tradition in which the same mythological logic was adapted for different theological purposes. Different gods, same story structure. That is a reasonable explanation, but there is a pattern here that does not dissolve into literary analysis. Two independent creation accounts, originating in different periods and different cities, both describe the creation of humanity through the deliberate extraction of blood from a specific non-human figure. Both describe a property carried in that blood. Both describe a result that was supposed to persist across generations. And both use language that in its most specific readings sounds less like cosmological poetry and more like a record of something that was remembered because it actually happened. The story should have stayed in the museum. Then May 2026 arrived. The allegations surfaced without warning. An author named Jason Reza Georgiani, a philosophy PhD, not a fringe figure by training, appeared on a podcast and described something he had been told by Lynn Buchanan, a retired Army sergeant who had participated in the CIA remote viewing program during the Cold War. According to Georgiani, the CIA had obtained backdoor access to the DNA databases of 23 and me and Ancestry.com. The scale was over 30 million profiles. The purpose, according to the claim, was to screen for anomalous genetic markers associated with non-terrestrial ancestry. The CIA denied it. Both companies denied it. Mainstream scientists rejected the premise entirely. There is no confirmed evidence. Timeline inconsistencies exist. The former CIA scientist named in related discussions, Kit Green, left the agency decades before consumer genetic testing companies existed. The allegation is unverified. It may be entirely false. No documentation has been provided. The Pentagon has repeatedly stated that UAP investigations have produced no confirmed evidence of extraterrestrial life. That is the factual record as of now. But here is the question the Atrahasis tablet puts to that denial. If someone were hypothetically searching consumer DNA databases for a specific inherited biological marker, one described in Akkadian cuneiform as introduced into the human lineage at the moment of creation, encoded in blood, and designed to carry a divine property through generations, what would that search look like? It would look like a sweep of millions of profiles, not because the marker would be common, because it would not be. The Atrahasis account does not suggest all humans carry the transferred property equally. It describes one specific divine blood source mixed into the first human, passed forward in diluted form through generations of reproduction, each generation carrying a smaller concentration of whatever the original transfer introduced. The Apkallu, the pre-flood classification, carried something different, something fuller, something that the texts treat as categorically distinct from what survived the flood. After the flood, that lineage became the Umanu, reclassified, diminished, absorbed into the general human population without a marker to distinguish them, except perhaps in their blood. If the marker still exists, it would not be uniform across the population. Most people would carry nothing anomalous. A small percentage, perhaps a very small percentage, would carry a measurable variation, not a disease, not a defect, a distinguishing property, something set apart from the baseline in a way that most genomic screening would pass over because it would not look like a mutation or an error. It would look like a variation, an unusually clean one. The Akkadian qualifier attached to Wila's blood in the Sipar fragment was a word linked to marking, distinguishing, and setting something apart from otherwise similar things. 30 million profiles would not be excessive if you were looking for a few thousand people or fewer. According to sources cited by Giorgiani in the unverified allegation, the program was not simply scanning for genetic difference. It was looking for something that activates, a latent property, a switch. The Atrahasis text says that the etemiu, the divine spirit embedded through the blood transfer, would cause human consciousness to recall the plan of the gods. This is where mainstream scholars are correct to stop. There is no scientific framework for inherited divine memory. There is no confirmed mechanism by which ancient ritual language maps to modern genetics. Etemu is a theological construct, not a biological one. But the question that will not fully close is this. If the Sumerians invented this, then they invented a creation account that specifies a donor, a transfer mechanism, a carried property, a retrieval condition, and a population split, and two separate civilizations preserve that same procedural logic using different mythological vessels. And if they did not invent it, if they were recording something, however imperfectly, however filtered through layers of religious interpretation and scribal tradition, then what they recorded was a deliberate biological event, one that left a marker, one that someone in the present day may believe is still findable. The clay tablet that started all of this is still in the British Museum. The Sipar fragment with the comparative analysis is in a 2014 issue of Iraq, a Cambridge journal, behind an institutional subscription. The German philological treatment of the blood qualifier passage is in a 1994 volume that has not been digitized for open access. The marginal notation has never appeared in a popular translation. No one removed it. No one reclassified the tablet. No scan was suppressed. The archive was simply never organized in a way that connected the most specific lines to the question they would eventually suggest. The 30 million DNA profiles, if the allegations are accurate, are sitting in a database somewhere. If they are not accurate, then the allegation itself is a story that happened to map with uncomfortable precision onto a 3,700-year-old text describing a search for blood that was never meant to stay hidden. The Atrahasis tablet ends badly for humanity. Enlil grows disturbed by the population that has grown from the creation. The humans are numerous. They are loud. He decides the species needs to be reduced. He sends plague, famine, drought. Each time, Enki intervenes to keep them alive. Eventually, Enlil sends the flood. The last known fragment of the section describing Enlil's final decision breaks off mid-sentence. The line ends. The clay ends. Whatever came next is gone. The official explanation is that the tablet is damaged. That is almost certainly true, but the Atrahasis account described a blood test once. It described a marker placed into humanity at the moment of creation. It described beings who carried a fuller version of that marker and then disappeared from the record. It described a god who grew concerned when the population carrying that marker became too large and too present. And in 2026, according to an unverified claim that no authority has been willing to examine in public, someone ran 30 million profiles through a filter looking for something anomalous in human blood. The tablet does not explain what was found. It only described what was hidden there. If you believe that language was myth, then the search in 2026 was for something that does not exist. If you believe that language was memory, distorted, compressed, translated 4 times across 4,000 years, but memory, then the search was already over before it began. The marker was never lost. It was only waiting to be named.